Okay, let's get started. Good morning, everybody. For those that don't know me, I'm Bernard Savage, and I'm one half of Size 10.5 Boots, a specialist business development agency that helps professional service firms to grow. I would like to welcome you this morning to a live and virtual roundtable where I'm joined by an expert panel of leaders either in professional service firms or work with professional service firms. And we're going to look at how can post-COVID. Just before we start, a couple of housekeeping points. Firstly, I think if I've done it correctly, I have actually muted everybody, but certainly would ask the speakers, please do unmute yourself. Secondly, there is the facility to ask questions, and please do ask questions by using the Zoom chat option. And you can do this in one of two ways, either send questions anonymously, in which case, well, they're not completely anonymously because they go to me as the host, that's Bernard Savage, but nobody else will see them. Or if you're more comfortable, then you can share them with everybody else. We'll attempt to answer all the questions at the end of the conversation. If for any reason we don't have time, then my commitment to you is either myself or one of the panelists will get back to you separately over the course of the next couple of days or so. Right then, I suppose we should get started, shouldn't we? Well, let's introduce our panelists this morning. And coming to us live from Cumbria is Andy Poole. So Andy, if you could kick off, please, and introduce yourself properly. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Bernard. Morning, Bernard. Morning, everybody. I'm Andy Poole. I'm the legal sector partner at Top 30 Accountants, Armstrong Watson. I had a 13-strong team that focuses exclusively on the legal sector, and we're the only accountancy firm that works in partnership with the Law Society nationally.
Good, good, good. And Nadia, if you could introduce yourself, please.
Thank you, Bernard. Morning, everybody. My name is Nadia Biles Davies. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for Sharpe Pritchard, which is a specialist public law firm in central London. We have a strong public sector client base, but also work within construction and large infrastructure public projects. I'm strategic operations, but I also oversee HR and marketing.
Good, good, good. And Anne.
Thanks, Bernard. I'm Anne Harnetty from Jonson, Beaumont. We are a search and selection firm that specialise in the professional services arena, placing that so-called C-suite, so chief executives, COOs, CFOs, etc. Excellent.
Harry, I can see you.
Yeah, thank you, Bernard. So Harry Iliffe from Capita Workplace Technology, Enterprise Account Director, and we look after and manage a large number of legal organisations and accountancy practices.
Great, thank you, Harry. And for those that don't know me, I'm not going to repeat what I said in the introduction, but what I will say is I'm double hatting, in fact, this morning. So I'm both host and I'm also here to deal with the marketing and business development side. So hopefully I'll be able to multitask this morning. Let's kick off by looking at how well we think professional service firms have reacted to the disruption. And I'm going to ask that question firstly to Andy from a financial perspective. How well do you think, Andy, that firms have reacted to the disruption caused by COVID in March?
Actually, on the whole, I think they've reacted pretty well. For most, maybe other than residential conveyancing specialists, they've actually generated more profit and more cash than they feared, and in some cases more than they'd actually been generating pre-COVID. A lot of that has been supported by the government measures, the furloughing schemes, the deferral of repayments and VAT and other expenditure. My fear actually for law firms is a little bit further down the line, once that support is taken away, maybe around the PII renewal season in autumn, and then looking a little bit further ahead to spring 2021, when the tax bills start to be repaid or the cash deferrals start to be repaid, and who knows what the economy will be like by then as well. I think we might have a couple of pinch points for law firms a little bit further down the line from a financial perspective. Productivity has actually also been pretty good, generating more with fewer people, which actually leads me on to a couple of further thoughts on that. Number one, if we can achieve that with more people, were we overstaffed before? And will redundancies follow after the furloughing ends? And secondly, utilisation levels do seem to be up, and I've just got a couple of fears there. Is that recoverable utilisation, or are people being a little less efficient at home, or are people covering up? Are they trying to show that actually we are busy because we're trying to protect jobs? So I think law firm leaders really need to be on top of what fee earners are doing and not just looking at the utilisation levels in isolation.
Okay, thanks, Andy. Nadia, as a leader of a law firm yourself, what have you seen within Sharpe Pritchard, or perhaps with conversations with your peer group outside?
Well, I think in summary, everyone expected the worst when it came to a wholesale move to remote working, and has been pleasantly surprised by the ability to work remotely at almost every level within law firms. I think for most people, they found it pretty seamless once that infrastructure was put in place. And I think the takeout from there actually is that, it's no surprise to me, but anyone and everyone can do it. That uptake of technology is going to transform the future of law firm working for me. It has fast forwarded what would have been a very long change process for many law firms trying to move to more mobile working and the uptake of technology. The second thing that I think everyone has talked about is that whilst everyone has is working remotely and working from home, the expectation might have been that there would have been a fracturing in communications and the work relationship. But actually, with that uptake of technology, communication has actually been better and stronger than ever. As a result of the people working from home, people have had to be more deliberate in their communication, more planned in their communication, and that has been that there has overall been more communication, which is only to benefit the business.
Absolutely, absolutely. Communicate. And from a people retention, staff development, hiring, succession planning perspective, what have you seen from your conversations with professional service firms?
Yeah, thanks, Ben. I think inevitably there will be redundancies, but what I will say is you need the right people to stay, and dare I say it, you need the right people to leave as well. I think the recession in 2008, we saw huge cuts of staff, but we also saw talent being brought in. And certainly from my perspective, we saw a huge amount of finance director hires because that strategic input was hugely needed. And I think COVID-19 has really shone a light on poor performance, and it's shone a light on bad behaviour, and that is being addressed. I think people really need to consider reputation. Often, if the people you want to stay decide to go and they take that story to the market, it can damage you. And believe you me, as recruiters, we hear those stories all the time. You've only got to think of people like Gordon Ramsay. If you put his name into social media, there'll be an absolute raft of people saying, "I'll never eat there again. He's treated his staff appallingly." You'll have his staff saying, "I never want to work in any of his restaurants. He's treated us so badly," and yet he's on social media saying what a fantastic lockdown he's had. So I think you need to scenario plan for the potential loss of teams. And believe me, there are headhunters out there who will happily headhunt teams of lawyers. It's not an issue to them. So it doesn't matter if you think you've got it right, it's how your teams feel they are being treated. And if you even suspect you've got it wrong, you need that Jurgen Klopp moment. You need a time to engage with people, to really empathise with people and to share your vision to keep them in place.
I wasn't expecting either Jurgen Klopp or Gordon Ramsay to get a look in this morning, but there we go. Harry, we've all had to adapt to working from home. We've had to embrace video conferencing. What's your perspective on how well firms have done this, and what do you think are the longer term implications for the professional services?
Because I think it's quite clear that legal organisations have had to work in ways, frankly, they never thought possible. So the use of tools like Zoom and Teams, we're using that today. Are ever increasing, and clearly organisations are having to embrace these technologies to really empower their staff and ensure that they're using technology to get the best from their their users. We clearly don't really know what the new normal is going to be. I think there's a general acceptance from most organisations we speak to that the workplace won't be the same as it was pre-COVID. I think organisations are in that state of flux at the moment where they're sort of starting to transition back and really understand what that impact is. But really providing opportunities for companies to start embracing change, embracing some of these digital projects that they were looking at. They've clearly had to accelerate, and organisations are clearly now looking to adapt the working environment to better suit the hybrid requirement, which is, there's a home worker, there's a remote worker. There's clearly appetite for people to have a blend of those roles, and I think legal organisations are going to have to adapt the working environment they have to better embrace those requirements.
Okay, thank you, Harry. And I think, I think to me what's coming across is across each of these areas, whether it's finance, people, IT systems, and I would argue the same for marketing and BD, we've all seen that people have been forced to change, but actually there are some positives to come out of this. And I think from a marketing BD perspective, there are three things that stand out for me. The first one is people are actually recognising now that there's more to business development than simply going to events. I think this is important. It's always been the case, but it's taken this for people actually to realise that, because they've got to look for alternatives. I think secondly, I want to sort of build on something that Nadia said earlier on about communication. One of the things that Doug and myself are forever saying to our clients is, look, speak to people in between an open matter, an open case, an open project. And actually, because of video conferencing, people now are actually getting that face contact, albeit it's virtual, rather than just pinging people emails. And I think thirdly, one of the other things that's interesting, which we've been forced to do, but it's a positive, is people are now looking at webinars as a potential alternative to seminars. Now, any of you that have been involved in organising seminars will know what a headache it can be. You're looking at 6 to 10 weeks from the idea to get it off the ground. You've got to find a venue, you've got to organise catering, you've perhaps got car park considerations as well. And then, of course, you've got the problem that when it actually comes to the day of the event, you haven't necessarily got the chief execs or the HR director if it's an employment seminar. You've actually got the HR consultant. So you lose a lot of people, whereas, using the webinar format, no, it's not perfect. And I've experienced myself some of the technological challenges that come with that. But look at the attendance today. We've got near as damn it a full house. We had 92 people signed up and we've got 80 odd that are here. That wouldn't happen, I don't think, in the traditional format. So there are some positives. And really, who really misses the canapes anyway? We can live without the canapes. Let's move on to the second topic, which looks at what the next stage of the return will look like from firms. So, Harry, if I can ask you, from your perspective, what do you think the next stage of the return will look like? What should firms be focusing on? What should they be looking to adapt or even change?
Yeah, thank you. So, I think it's fair to say that most organisations are starting to now transition back to the office. They're clearly undertaking that very much in a phased approach. I think certainly from the organisations we've spoken to, there have been a number of polls and surveys of staff to really understand what the appetite for their users are. I think the results are quite clear that most staff are saying they're not comfortable at this stage in returning to the office just yet, if there is a choice. I think there are clearly organisations that are using technology to assist them in bringing staff back safely. So, whether that be that you're using a thermal imaging camera in your reception and scanning users as they come in and understanding that bit, whether that you're looking at providing technology and tools that may assist them in actually doing remote hot desk booking, so they can physically see, is there room in the office for me to go in? So I think increasingly technology will play its part, but I think the process will be delayed. I think most are sort of suggesting we'll start creeping back around the October-November time. What we do know is organisations are now looking at those processes, those historical processes that they've had, typically manual and paper intensive, and really trying to understand what technologies are available and how can they adapt their business to better align those processes to being digitally focused, and removing that manual intervention piece. So, you know, it's difficult to try and spin COVID as a positive, because I don't think there are many positives that will come out of it. But I do think that it's provided a real instigator of change to legal organisations to try and seize this opportunity to change those manual processes and the culture that they have within the working environment.
Excellent. Okay, and from a people perspective, what is it that you think firms should be focusing in on?
Yeah, thank you. I think you need to really give your operations heads a proper place at the table. I think if you recognise that they can really add value, and if you share your ideas of your future vision, they will have great ideas if you listen to them. I think to keep talent, you've got to recognise it, you've got to reward it, and to retain it, you've got to invest in training and development. I think new roles will evolve. There'll be roles we've never even heard of at the moment that will pop up. But I think existing roles could really enhance what's going on within the firm. Bernard, you've already said it, and I think the typical example is the BD and marketing side. They can really strengthen and enhance client relationships if they're not seen as an events team. You're absolutely right, I agree with you totally. And I think for poor beleaguered partners who have taken the brunt of a lot of this, non-executive directors could be immensely helpful. We see it in firms already, but I think they can really help a firm. And I think for partners, they can really help your well-being as well.
Excellent, thank you, Anne. And Nadia, what advice would you give business leaders? Hang on.
I think I'm unmuted now.
I think I'm pleased my sign language is working.
Harry touched on two key things that I think really impact on the operational side in law firm management, and that's we've got different work behaviours emerging, and we've also got a significant uptake in technology. And what we're looking at now in terms of the office is two phases in the approach for the move back. So we've got a sort of grey area of COVID compliance, where we're setting up the office so that we can prioritise the health and safety of our people. But then there is a longer piece of work as to how that change in the use of technology, the change in workplace behaviours, potentially more remote working, is going to impact on the space. And there's a really rare opportunity that operational leaders have at the moment, which is pretty much an empty office. No one is there. So we have a bit of a blank slate and a blank canvas to really look at the lessons of lockdown and reimagine the space to embed the key behaviours that we want to continue with. So that's also about learning the lessons of lockdown, looking at what the key learnings are for our people, not just from a leadership perspective, but also understanding how people work habits have changed and how they see them changing in the future, and then looking at what we can do within the office to make sure that the office is then fit for purpose in relation to those post-lockdown work behaviours that we will see coming through. And I think I touched on talking to our people, but you can't bring that change through without consulting your people within the firm. We need to listen to their lessons, and any consultation process will help identify those learnings and the opportunities, but more than that, it will also help them feel part of the conversation, so that when we want to bring in that change and embed that change, we will be bringing them with us, and they will feel part of the conversation. It's the first step in that change management process. And then I think the final challenge around that, when we're looking at change and rebuilding that new way of working and having an office that reflects that, is trying not to allow us to slip back into old habits. I think there is a danger that we'll take these lessons and we'll feel very positive about what work might look like, and we'll fit out a new office to perhaps have more collaborative spaces, more pods, quiet working areas, to embrace that technological change. But it will be very easy to go straight back into an office and go back to how we are working in that old environment. And so it's going to be a real change for operational leaders to make sure that not only are we readying an office that is fit for change and fits that new future of working, but also that we embed that change and drive it through, so that we don't just go back to the old habits.
Excellent. And Andy, surely now is the time to move on from cost cutting and cash protection, isn't it? And look more at more financial strategic management of the business.
Well, actually, for me, cash always does remain king, and that has to remain forefront of minds, both now and throughout the recovery. Continual updating forecasts, amending strategy as a result. That's what's going to help guide management teams as we move forward from here. But that said, there's only so many branches you can cut before you no longer have a tree. Yes, you need to be lean. Yes, lessons need to be learned, as Nadia was talking about there, on what resources are required, etc. But without bringing the engine room back, you're not really going to have the power to outpace your rivals. And again, as Nadia was talking about, operational lessons have been learned. People have been forced to change their habits. And a lot of my strategic consulting with law firms has been about trying to bring about that change in behaviours within lawyers. And lawyers, as being only human, are quite reluctant to change. And they've been quite resistant to having to change the ways and the way that they operate, becoming more efficient, etc. I think now we've got a golden opportunity. Now people have been forced into a change. Their mindsets have changed. They've realised, actually, it wasn't so bad after all. So now we've got this opportunity. I think we need to be capitalising on that mindset change and really taking advantage of the fact that people will be accepting this change. There'll be lots of things that have changed for the good that we need to be able to keep. So take advantage of that. Make sure that we go through, therefore, analysing what's been good about it, what's been bad about it. As Nadia said, getting the teams together to have their input in, so it's not feeling as though it's the management saying you must make these changes, but actually going through step by step through a lean process review. What do we need to do? When does it need to be done by? Who needs to do it? How is it going to be done? And actually mapping that out and having a lean process efficiency review will really help people as we're going back in. That then ties back into things that Harry and Nadia were talking about in terms of office space, office use, resources that we need, etc. And I think that's what firms need to be really focusing on right now.
Okay, thanks, Andy. From a marketing BD perspective, I believe there's three priorities now. I think firstly, now's the time to take marketing and BD strategy seriously rather than just doing what you've always done before and being reactive. It's actually about taking a far more strategic approach. I think the second thing I would say is that whilst a lot of firms talk about client relationship management, that conversation tends to be about software. It isn't about software at all. I would like to banish the term CRM and introduce client developments, because it should be about building relationships, and it should be, again, about much more than just dealing with the white space and cross-selling. And I think thirdly, now is the time that we've really got to measure business development. We've got to make fee earners accountable. And it's about understanding the difference between inputs and outputs. The financial performance is often referred to as key performance indicators. I would argue it's a key result indicator. It's a consequence of something that's happened or not happened previously. And I think if we measure business development activity as an input, recognizing that there's a time lag between doing stuff and getting output and cash in the till, then the businesses will be in a stronger position. Right, let's move on to a third area. What specifically do we think firms need to do if they're going to return to their former market position, their former fee levels, in what's certain to be a very different trading environment? And I'm going to ask Nadia to go first on that one, please.
It's a big question, isn't it?
It is a big question. So
I think it very much, the starting point is it depends on the lockdown activity that firms have had. I think the more that firms have used this time to stay in touch with clients, their referees, then the smaller the mountain there will be to climb to come back, because they'll have kept those contacts alive. And they'll have hopefully looked over lockdown at ways to continue to demonstrate value. Bernard, you mentioned webinars. I think webinars are one of those fantastic things that are sort of beyond geographical boundaries. And so there have been opportunities throughout lockdown to try and stay in touch, which I think is the starting point. So the very much the jumping off point in terms of recovery to some extent will be how much those contacts and those touch points and those relationship building has continued. And then of course different work areas will be affected in different ways, and so some will be hugely affected and some less so. And I think the three watchwords for me in terms of looking to the future will be adaptability, creativity, and then communication. So we just need to try and get everyone within our teams, whether fee earners or not, to start thinking a little differently and look for those opportunities much more strategically than they ever have done before. There'll of course be a need to look outside usual work streams, look for alternative opportunities. But then there's another piece that will help ameliorate any of the some of the possible downturn coming out of lockdown, and that's very much what Andy's touched on, which is the review of resources, review of processes, and looking at those key opportunities for efficiencies, the reducing overheads, particularly in view of different ways of working, and looking at the staffing. We know that people will have been used very differently during lockdown, and depending on the take of the firm and what lessons they're taking into the new ways of working in the future, there will be different ways of working and different ways of making efficiencies through that process as well.
Okay, thank you. And Harry, from an operational perspective, what will you add to what Nadia has said?
Yeah, thanks, Bernard. So I think organisations are you know, we've commented are in this state of flux. I think really trying to take the opportunity to truly understand how information is flowing through their organisation, almost cradle to grave. I think it's fair to say that most organisations have invested heavily in document management platforms, PRMs, finance packages. I think there's an opportunity to really maximise and exploit the capability of some of those products, which have, I think, a plethora of additional services that go with them and work streams, and enable them to have, you know, very bespoke, customizable workflows and processes that drive into those applications. You know, I think organizations are working towards having, you know, one version of the truth in their business in terms of documentation. So I think the refinement of those processes is critical. I think we touched upon the return to the office. So increasingly, so organizations to really increase the agile working policy, better adapting their environment to cater for that flexible working mentality. And increasingly, we're seeing organizations already starting to adapt some of their business services or document services teams, whereby they now accept that they have large numbers of staff remote. They have maybe a small core team of people within the office, and almost creating a scenario where you have almost a print as a service or a job ticketing facility that then drives and centralizes that requirement into one point. So I think that there are a lot. I think, as we've touched on, there are a lot of moving pieces, and I think that the organisations really need to take the opportunity to do a grassroots, you know, analytical review of their organisation and how information flows, and then start to instigate change through that. Will and should start driving both time savings and speed of contact back to client.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. And Anne, what advice would you give people with regards to hiring and succession planning at the moment?
Yeah, I'd say don't arbitrarily cut budgets. We've done without, we don't need. Have a deeper dive and say, what value do people add to us, or have we got the right value? Don't just automatically hire in the same image. We've always had this, we'll do this again. Look deeper than that. Look at each and every role, and particularly for your operations heads, really think about, do they add strategic value? If we look at HR, if you say to your HR head, I want to make these people redundant, how many of you, your HR head just goes, yes, okay. But how many of you does that person say, yeah, we can do that, but I've looked at that. Perhaps we could job share, perhaps we could retrain, perhaps we could redeploy. Now you've got someone who's looking strategically for value add for your firm and not just someone who's doing as you ask them. And I think the big thing to look at is not partnership problems or law firm problems. Look at business problems and how you can change things. And I think that changes perception, and then it's easier to innovate and invest for value add. And that's what a lot of the big four are doing. And they pick up work because they look at business issues.
Well, one of the themes here for me is across these four business pillars is one of people being more strategic. The word strategy is used a lot, but how often are firms really strategic? And within that, my view is that business development now really needs to be taken seriously. Business development isn't something you do when you're not very busy. The work's thin on the ground. Business development has to be a habit. It has to be pervasive across your culture. And that does mean some investment, because how much non-technical skills training do your fee earners get? How confident are they? How focused are they? How effective are they practically in the way they go about business development? And one of the issues historically has been that business development has been regarded as just being about networking at formal events and eating canapes, but there's a little bit more to it than that. And many people that perhaps historically have been not involved in BD actually can make a really valued contribution. That some of the best business developers I've come across are actually quite reflective introverts like myself. That was a joke, by the way. But it does, business development comes in different shapes and forms. I think it needs to be taken seriously now, because after all, effective communication and client care are going to be more important than ever before. That's where I'm coming from. I want to finish this part of the meeting on a positive note, really, because there aren't that many sort of positive stories with COVID. But what I'm interested to understand from each of the panelists is what one lesson that they've learned in the last 3 months. So we're going to try and make this as positive as possible. So no pressure, Anne. But what have you learned? What's the big thing you've learned in the last 3 months?
Yeah, don't be chicken little. The sky is falling in. I'm sure every finance director, when they were forecasting about 15 times at the start of the lockdown, really thought the sky was falling in. But look, we're all still sitting here and it didn't. So we can move forward. And I think you've got to have the agility to react quickly to insights that are emerging. Even if they're the absolute opposite to something you've just planned, something better will come. I think you're right, Ben. You've got to really listen to your clients. You've got to listen to your staff to move forward. And I think we will move forward. And I don't think we'll move forward in the same place, but I really believe we'll move forward to a better place.
Okay, thank you. And same question to Harry. What have you learned? Big positive lesson.
So I think really in summary, that organisations shouldn't fear change. I think they should really try and embrace it. And hopefully COVID will have taught them that that they've been able to work in ways, frankly, they never thought possible. If I had a conversation with any of my legal clients 6-9 months ago and said, do you think it would work if 80-90%, if not more, of your staff are working remotely, they'd all laugh. And so I think remote working can work. Change does have positive results, and organisations, I think, need to focus on ways of empowering staff to maximise results.
Excellent. Okay, and same question to you, Nadia. You've always got a positive spin on things, so I know you're not going to let us down.
I think for me, it's the importance of communication and the opportunity for better, clear and consistent communication that this period of lockdown has offered us. We've been working in a really unique time, which has really led people to potentially feel quite isolated, feel fractured from that sense of firm community. But I think the uptake of technology in the communications has really enabled people to stay feeling part of a firm community, feeling part of a team culture. And as we've all touched on throughout this panel session, that element of communication will have enabled us to put our best foot forward in recovery. So it's about making sure that we're connected to our people and our people feel safe and secure and positive. It's about reassurance, but also it's about strategic cross-selling and getting those messages out about the work that firms and teams are doing. It's the key to marketing. You've touched on it yourself, Bernard. It's the key to client relationship management. So for me, it's been the real emphasis on strategic communications and consistent communications that has come out of it.
And same question to Andy, from a financial perspective, what's the big lesson you've learned, Andy?
Well, for me, it's not really from a financial perspective. It's actually treating people in the right way. You know, I've got a feeling that the way that our behaviours are right now will be remembered for a very long time to come, whether that's with colleagues, with clients, with suppliers. You know, treating people in the right way, being there for them, going out of your way to help people. All of that's going to be remembered for a long time. And it's going to bolster relationships if you do things in the right way. Doing that in the wrong way, just focusing on your own business, your own interests, not understanding the position of others, will also be remembered for a long time, and that will break a lot of relationships as well. So for me, it's communicating often, but communicating in the right way, showing that empathy and treating people in the right way.
Okay, thank you. I always like to have the last word, so today's not going to be an exception. For me, the biggest thing that I've learned in the last 3 months is the importance of relationships, and those relationships are their family, their friends, they're certainly clients, their referrers, their other professional contacts. But you know what? Perhaps as much as anything else are your own colleagues. And, you know, I'm quite happy to go on record and say that, you know, my business partner, Doug McPherson, has been an absolute rock in the last 3 months. And, you know, let's not forget about our colleagues and all of this, because they play a significant part in us, you know, protecting and developing our businesses. Right, what we're going to do now is the fun bit. Well, it might be fun if it works, which is the Q&A. And I really am going to have to multitask now, because I'm going to look at some of the questions that have been asked. So you can talk amongst yourselves for 10 seconds, please. Right. So we have one question here. First question I'm going to ask is, what do you think the legal sector is going to look like in 12 months from today? Now, who might be best placed to answer that question? Harry, you look like you'd like to answer that question.
Well, thank you, Bernard. Yes, I think I touched upon this a little bit in some of the previous quick questions, but I think there'll be clearly a continuation of remote working practices. I think there'll be a scenario where increasing numbers of people will have hybrid roles. So they'll be, you know, maybe in the office 1 or 2 days a week. They'll be remote for the remainder. I think it's quite clear already legal organisations are starting to make changes within their environment as staff return. So whether that be that they are moving away from having the dedicated desk mentality, which is that, you know, I have a fee earner that sits in a corner desk, you know, with a window looking out the office, and his secretary or PA is sat outside. I think that will start to shift. There'll be an increasing number of sort of hot desks, maybe far more open plan working policies. I think organisations are starting to already look at things like printers and photocopiers as an example. You know, they know that their staff, their workforce have survived without all of these tools for the last 3-4 months. And I think their biggest fear is that they go back to the office and we go straight back to the ways that we were all working previously. So I think the workforce will be a different place. It is hard to answer, because I don't think we really know yet what really is going to play out over the next 12 to 18 months. But I think there's the general view from the people I'm speaking to and some of the insights we've had is that it certainly won't be what it was pre-COVID. So there you go.
Thanks, Harry. I'll just add to what Harry has said from a personal perspective, and I don't have a crystal ball any more than anyone else has got, but I don't think it's too bullish of me to predict. I think, you know, regrettably, there will be fewer law firms in 12 months' time than there are today. And, you know, again, speaking candidly, some of that is probably necessary. There are, at the last count, 10,000 odd law firms. I'm sure Andrew Roberts will know exactly how many there are, but there's about 10,000 law firms. what do I think will happen? I think we might see the market go a little bit more like perhaps within the accountancy sector, where there's a clear distinction between the big four, and we've got Grant Thornton, BDO, we've got another group, and then we've got another group. I think we're going to see some of the large firms get bigger, and I think we're going to see more niche practices, but I think that reflects something else. It touches relates to a question actually someone's asked about predicting new niches. And I think if we look at society at large, we look at what's happening in the world, people increasingly are moving from going from generalists to specialists, and I don't see it being any different within the professions. I think we will see fewer firms, but I think the shape it will change. We'll have some very big firms, we'll actually have some very successful niche practices. Perhaps it's the ones in the middle that might have a tougher time. We've got a question here with regards to what we think about employee share ownership schemes and what the future might be. And if Andy doesn't mind, I'm going to direct that question to Andy, because I think Andy's probably better qualified than certainly I am.
Yeah,
is that okay, Andy? Thank you.
I can comment on that, and just to add to what Harry and Bernard have been saying there in terms of the future, looking at the market as well. You know, we're involved in a lot of law firm merger and acquisition activity. We held a webinar just on, you know, law firm mergers in COVID and beyond not so long ago, and that's up on our website for anybody who wants to go and see it. But generally, the conclusions of the panel there was that along similar lines, yes, there will probably be a lot more consolidation. There is still activity that's happening now, albeit different types of activity than there was happening maybe a few months ago. And as we go forward, I think there will be a lot more activity. Not necessarily acquisitions, but certainly mergers, certainly firms coming together, and there will be a few distressed sales, no doubt. There may well be a few firms that struggle, a few firms that go out of business, and then there'll be other firms that they're waiting to pick up the pieces, whether that's picking up the best people, the best clients, etc. So I certainly think there will be a lot of that, and that's just adding to what Harry and Bernard said as well. He says all that buying time whilst thinking on his feet for the employee share option schemes. I do think that is growing in popularity and has been for some time. There's not that many that have gone down that route, but there have been quite a few firms that have come to us to explore it. And that's not just exploring it from a tax perspective, from the tax planning perspective, but it's also from a succession planning perspective. There are quite a few firms that are looking at their futures and thinking, well, how am I going to get through this? How am I going to get out? Particularly, actually, some relatively smaller firms than you would think are looking at this, because they've got quite large capital accounts, a few partners approaching retirement, thinking, how am I going to get out? How am I going to get my capital repaid? And actually spreading that cost across a wider number of people, across all of your employees, is a potential way. But you then add to that all of the benefits of doing something like that, which is involving all of your people, tying your people into the business, giving them a stake, giving them more incentive to perform, giving them more incentive to stay. And it does make sense, but it takes quite a long time. It takes a lot of planning to be able to get it right, which is why not many people have gone down that route yet. But I do think that it is one of these that, watch this space, it will grow and grow. Thanks,
Andy. I'm not sure if we've got any architects or anybody from any architectural practices dialed in. I don't think we have, but certainly I would say to everyone, if you've got friends or colleagues that work within architectural practices, be worth talking to them, because I know that a lot of architects are going down that employee ownership scheme approach. We've got a question here about what our view is on outsourcing, whether we feel that there's going to be an increased need for non-technical areas like HR, IT, finance, marketing and BD to be outsourced. And I'm going to ask Anne, if she doesn't mind, to give a view on outsourcing, please.
Sure, we see it work really well, and we see some issues with it. So I think the things that work really well, IT is a typical thing that is outsourced, but more and more we have seen where it's outsourced, big firms in particular wanting to bring a head of IT back into the business because they don't feel they know what's going on. They don't feel they've got a grip of what's going on. So that's the caveat on that. I think there are other roles. There can be a very costly mistake if you don't get a role right. And I'll use Bernard as an example because I'm sure he won't mind. So quite often we're asked to come in and look at BD and marketing roles. And I think sometimes what a firm feel they need and what they actually need can be quite disparate. So if you can get somebody like Bernard in to take a proper overview of what you need, it can be far more cost effective than making a big error. And it's not just the error and the cost of the recruitment, it's the cost of the naysayers who said that will never work, it can never move forward. So it can be really cost effective to bring somebody like Bernard and Doug in to have a look. HR, I haven't seen outsourced. I'm sure it's quite possible. We know a lot of finance is outsourced, but again, I think you need a head of somewhere in your firm to please partners and really know what's going on. So it works both ways, Bernard.
Must invite you again, Anne.
Either later.
Yeah. Another question here regarding what our view is on sector-based strategies, and I'm going to put my hand up and answer that question if I can, but please, if someone else has got a perspective, then do chip in. There are an awful lot of professional service firms that purport to have a sector-based strategy. There's an awful lot, and again, without being disingenuous to anyone here or within the professions, I think we're paying lip service to sector-based strategies. You know, my advice is to take a sector-based approach seriously, because as I touched on earlier on, you know, as buyers ourselves, we increasingly go to specialists, not generalists. And you look at the high street, you know, you look at the retail sector here, there's plenty of evidence that, you know, generalists struggle. But the thing is, if you're going to be serious about niches, if you're going to be serious about sectors, here's the reality. Firstly, you need to really understand those sectors, like really understand them. And that involves listening to clients. Now, every professional service firm I've ever worked with, and I've worked with more than 150, and all of them have told me how they listen. They're different to every other law firm or other accounting practice because they listen to their clients. The evidence suggests not. This is about having conversations which aren't about the law, or they're not about accounting. They're about the client and their business position and their interests. And I always remember many years ago, I was working on behalf of a law firm. I went to go and see, and I'm going to be specific because I don't see any reason why it shouldn't be, and it's many years ago. But I went to go and see somebody in the retail sector as a booker, cash and carry, an in-house solicitor. And at the time, it was in the public domain that Booker, Cash and Carry's principal legal advisors were Berwin, Leighton, Paisner, at least as they were known at the time. Now Berwin, Leighton, Brian Cave. And I said as tactfully as I could, why do you give all your work to BLP? Because they're quite expensive. And I got a very direct answer, which was, I'm more than happy to give all my work to BLP and pay them £700 plus an hour, because I know they read the Grocer magazine. I know that they know an SKU is a stock keeping unit. I know that they understand about Christmas trading. I know that they understand that branch 11502 is up 9% year on year. Point is, it's got nothing to do with the law. This is the point. So I think a sector-based approach is a smart way to go, but I think firms have got to do more than just put some copy on the website and claim to have specialism in 22 sectors, because frankly, it's not possible. You can't be a specialist in 22 sectors. So that's my view for what it's worth. I don't know whether any of the other panelists have got a perspective on niches or sectors. Andy, please.
Yes, thanks, Bernard. Obviously something very close to my heart, having done nothing but advise lawyers for nearly 20 years now, and I've been out and out sector specialist myself. And I've seen firsthand, you know, the benefits that can bring, not just taking advantage of opportunities, but also putting it into the context of where we are in the market now, actually protecting market position as well. Because if we have got particular threats going forward, and there is the potential for market to contract, actually by being sector specialists, by being there as the famous people within that sector, the go-to people, well, actually, if the market is going to contract, you're going to be best placed to retain your higher share of that market. And if people are then looking around, they're more likely to come to you as well. You know, and it's not just from being perceived, it's not just from the knowledge, it's not just from the efficiency, but actually, when you really specialize in something, you develop extra services. You do things that are different to others. So, you know, within our legal sector team, we do far more than other accountants do. And we are creating our own markets there. And that's, I think, is the real benefit of sector specialism. It's going out and creating your own market, your own niches, your own additional workflows. That actually, if we then go back to wanting to maximize future recoveries, maximize future fees and profits, we've got to take advantage and go and find those extra work types. And I think that's sector specialism is just one way of doing it.
Okay, we've got another question in which I'd be interested in panelists, their perspective on this. What are firms doing about the client experience during this lockdown period? So I don't know whether anybody's got any perspectives on listening to clients at this difficult time. Nadia, you're giving me some positive body language here, which I'm assuming is because you've got an excellent answer, but you'll need to unmute yourself, please.
Sorry, my mouse went to sleep.
That's okay.
Well, I think we're just being more creative. We've recently started an initiative with a select group of clients in which we have a virtual meetup, a bit of a coffee club, as it were. We're sharing resources. We've obviously digitalized all our resources, but we're just looking to build opportunities to not only cement our relationships and our ongoing relationships, but also build new ones through technology. We've had a huge ramp up in the webinars that we're offering. We've looked for groups where we can share those webinars to new viewers. So I think there is a lot of opportunity there. It's about being a little bit brave for people who perhaps this technology is new to, but also being creative.
Thank you. And if I could just add to that, one of the things that Doug and I are forever saying to clients is make sure you have conversations with people outside of open client files or open matters. And the reality is, for many fee earners, I think that presents a challenge, because Nadia talked about being brave. I think some people are uncomfortable with that. And I think one of the things that's been a positive, a small positive from this whole crisis, has been that for the first time perhaps ever in our, never mind our careers and our lives, we've all got something in common with each other. All of us are grappling with the issue of working from home, the impact that this pandemic is having on us personally, professionally. I don't think anybody's untouched by this. And what that means practically in terms of the client experience is that I'm seeing people are actually being more open than perhaps they've ever been before, and more comfortable with actually sharing what's often quite personal stuff. And I've been privy, as I'm sure probably all of you have, of some insights that I felt really quite humbled, quite touched that people have shared quite personal things with me. Less personal than that sort of serious stuff. But one of the other things I would say is that I'd really encourage people, over and above the kind of formal stuff, so over and above the things like, I don't know, virtual quizzes or virtual beers and all of that stuff, is just pick up the telephone to people you know and just have a chat, have a natter. And I can think of one particular client, I'm not going to say who, but works in an accountancy practice. And I feel over the course of the last 3 months, I now have a deep insight of every piece of vinyl, CD and musical interest. And that's a two-way thing. And actually what started off as a conversation about going to see a band in, I don't know, 1986, is then translated into something, it's moved on into something else. So I think now is the time, more than any other time, to use Nadia's word again, to be brave and engage with people. Okay, Nadia.
I was just going to add to that. I do think, as you were saying, there's been a huge humanization of professional relationships by virtue of things like Team and Zoom. We've all sat in rooms and we've been able to not only build relationships with colleagues where we've never had an insight into their home lives before, but also with our professional contacts, just by virtue of being able to have almost a window into home life. We've all had the same struggles, if for those who are working with children, having the little hands and feet coming through when we're trying to have a Zoom call has affected these elements of everyday life whilst working remotely, has affected absolutely everybody. I certainly feel I'm 18 months into my COO role at Sharpe Pritchard, and I have got to know my team better and more, I feel more deeply through this remote working system than I would ever have done in the office, because I had conversations about work and exchange pleasantries, whereas now we are asking each other how we're doing, how we're getting on, we're talking through the challenges, and there's no reason why you wouldn't have that similar conversations and the same laughs and giggles about the pain of remote working with professional contacts outside of the office, and that is what builds those relationships for the future.
Thank you. I'm very conscious of time, and I promised to everyone that we wouldn't overrun, so I just want to wrap up this morning's session. Firstly, I want to say a big thank you to Harry, to Anne, to Nadia and Andy. Hope I haven't forgotten anyone. Oh, and me. For giving up their time and investing, in preparing. It's not just a case of sort of turning up for an hour. They've been brilliant in preparation for this morning. And thank you to all of you who are busy too. You've got other pools on your time, personally and professionally. So thank you, and I hope you've got some value from this morning. The final thing I want to say is that a theme, whether you're talking about finance, whether you're talking about operational matters, people matters, marketing matters, where we're all at the moment is we are largely working from home, and that in itself presents a lot of practical difficulties. And what I want to do is alert you to the fact that at 10.5 we set up a specialist website which is full of practical resources that can help you both have better conversations with people, whether that's through video conferencing, whether that's through telephone, help you practically in terms of ideas behind creating better content, whether that's written content or video content or any other type of content, and also how to better use social media, LinkedIn more specifically. So that's available to you. It's got a very simple domain name, which it does what it says on the tin. So it's www.howtodobusinessdevelopmentfromhome.com. Do have a look at that, and hopefully you'll find those resources of help. It's 10:59, so I've delivered on my timekeeping bit. Thank you once again, and I hope to see many of you again very soon. So cheerio for now. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Cheers.
Thanks, Ben.